Does observation affect reality? A big question in quantum physics over at least the past couple decades, probably much longer, is does observation affect reality? Does our mere observation of a particle affect its direction? If you haven't done so already, subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, share this with your friends and family. And of course, I'm interested in what you think about this. I was I was actually on Facebook today, and somebody had shared this article with me. So a special thanks to Matt for giving me this. And in response to the message, you are very welcome, Matt. It is my pleasure. This is really interesting because actually this article is back from February 27th of 1998, so it's an older article. Um, and I know I said a couple of videos back that when it comes to old articles, you got to be careful. But this is actually still a relevant question in physics today. If observation actually does affect reality, and it's kind of interesting to read through to see how they looked at it almost 20 years ago. But so the article says one of the most bizarre premises of quantum theory, which has long fascinated philosophers and physicists alike, states that by the very act of watching, the observer affects the observed reality. It says in a study reported in the February 26th issue of Nature, researchers at the Weizmann Institute of Science have now conducted a highly controlled experiment demonstrating how a beam of electrons is affected by the act of being observed. The experiment revealed that the greater the amount of watching, the greater the observer's influence on what actually takes place. The research team headed by Professor Mordechai Heiblum included PhD student Eyal Books, Dr. Ralph Schuster, Dr. Diana Mahalu, and Dr. Vladimir Umansky. The scientists, members of the Condensed Matter Physics Department, work at the Institute's Joseph H. and Bell R. Braun Center for Submicron Research. When a quantum observer is watching, quantum mechanics states that particles can also behave as waves. This can be true for electrons at the submicron level, i.e., at distances measuring less than 1 micron, or 1,000th of a millimeter. When behaving as waves, they can simultaneously pass through several openings in a barrier and then meet again at the other side of the barrier. This meeting is known as interference. Strange as it may sound, interference can only occur when no one is watching. Once an observer begins to watch the particles go through the openings, the picture changes dramatically. If a particle can be seen going through one opening, then it's clear it didn't go through the other. In other words, when under observation, electrons are being forced to behave like particles and not like waves. Thus, the mere act of observation affects the experimental findings. To demonstrate this, Weizmann Institute researchers built a tiny device measuring less than 1 micron in size, which has a barrier with 2 openings. They then sent a current of electrons toward the barrier. The observer in this experiment wasn't human. Institute scientists used for this purpose a tiny but sophisticated electronic detector that can spot passing electrons. The quantum observer's capacity to detect electrons could be altered by changing its electrical conductivity or the strength of the current passing through it. Apart from observing or detecting the electrons, the detector had no effect on the current. Yet, the scientists found that the very presence of the detector observer near one of the openings caused changes in the interference pattern of the electron waves passing through the openings of the barrier. In fact, this effect was dependent on the amount of the observation. When the observer's capacity to detect electrons increased, in other words, when the level of the observation went up, the interference weakened. In contrast, when its capacity to detect electrons was reduced, in other words, when the observation slackened, the interference increased. Thus, by controlling the properties of the quantum observer, the scientists managed to control the extent of its influence on the electron's behavior. The theoretical basis for this phenomenon was developed several years ago by a number of physicists, including Dr. Adi Stern and Professor Yosef Imri of the Weizmann Institute of Science, together with Professor Yakir Aharonov of Tel Aviv University. The new experimental work was initiated following discussions with Weizmann Institute professor Shmuel Gurvitz, and its results have already attracted the interest of theoretical physicists around the world and are being studied, among others, by Professor Yehoshua Levinson of the Weizmann Institute. The experiments finding that observation tends to kill interference may be used in tomorrow's technology to ensure the secrecy of information transfer. This can be accomplished if information is encoded in such a way that the interference of multiple electron paths is needed to decipher it. The presence of an eavesdropper who is an observer, although an unwanted one, would kill the interference, said Professor Heiblum. This would let the recipient know that the message has been intercepted. On a broader scale, the Weizmann Institute experiment is an important contribution to the scientific community's efforts aimed at developing quantum electronic machines, which may become a reality in the next century. This radically new type of electronic equipment may exploit both the particle and wave nature of electrons at the same time, and a greater understanding of the interplay between these two characteristics are needed for the development of this experiment. Such future technology may, for example, open the way to the development of new computers whose capacity will vastly exceed that of today's most advanced machines. The research was funded in part by the Minerva Foundation, Munich, Germany. Professor Imri holds the Max Planck Chair of Quantum Physics and heads the Albert Einstein Minerva Center for Theoretical Physics. The Weizmann Institute of Science in Rehovot, Israel, is one of the world's foremost centers of scientific research and graduate study. Its 2,400 scientists, students, technicians, and engineers pursue basic research in the quest for knowledge and the enhancement of the human condition, new ways of fighting disease and hunger, protecting the environment, and harnessing alternative sources of energy are high priorities. All right, so if you want to check out that article, you can look in the show notes. I have the link. So, what do you think of this? Does observation actually affect reality? I will tell you my thoughts, as I usually do. So in the past, what would that be, 18 years or so, since this article's come out, there have been a few different thoughts on this. I don't think there's a concrete answer, but there are a few different things. First, even though it says here, let me find it again. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to find it. Oh, yeah, it's right here. Apart from observing or detecting the electrons, the detector had no effect on the current. Well, they don't know that. There's no way to know that. I mean, just the fact that there is a detector and the experiment's being affected. I think a simpler answer might be that there was something in the detector, because if we're working on things at a quantum level, I mean, the tiniest little shift could affect the experiment greatly. I mean, even just having the thing on. So that might be something, but I don't know enough about the detectors and how they work to really know that for sure. That's just a thought. So I don't know. But the other thing is for at least human observation, when we observe an experiment as humans, we need light to be able to see, otherwise our eyes don't work. But working on things at a quantum level like that, really what you're doing is introducing photons into the experiment, which can really mess up the whole experiment. And just adding photons can weaken the interference pattern. It's like if you're shooting a hose, trying to shoot a hose across the room, but then a really powerful sprinkler system comes on, it would affect the stream of the hose. So the stream of the hose is like the electron beam, and the sprinklers are like the floodlights or just any light source. So that can affect it too. So in that sense, I guess us observing it would affect it, but it's not just the fact that we're observing it, it's because we're introducing photons. So that's another thing. Also, And that may or may not apply to this. And what they didn't name it in here, but the experiment that they're talking about is called the double slit experiment. If you want information on that, you can check out my book, Quantum Creation. I wrote a lot about that in there. It's at ministudyministry.com and Amazon. There's also a link to that in the show notes. So that's the experiment. It's definitely really interesting, but also uh, there's there's this idea that the whole wave particle duality, that's the issue that they're talking about here, how a particle can seem to act as a particle and a wave. It might just be that our perception is limited. Dr. Sean Carroll has a really good presentation about this. Um, and this is what I think is most plausible. What's actually happening? Uh, in quantum field theory, everything is waves, basically. So when we look at a wave, we see a particle. It resolves into a particle, not by itself, but it's just our limited perception that sees it as a particle. It's still a wave. It's just our limited perception sees a particle, if that makes sense. So really, we're not seeing the true reality of what's happening there. The true reality is waves, but we see particles. So it could just be that, and that's quantum field theory. That's a whole rabbit trail. I mean, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, subscribe to my channel because we talk about it often. Um, I also wrote a little bit about that in my in Quantum Creation, I think in Cherubim Chariots, and my newest book, which is not out yet but will be sometime this year. I talk a lot about it. So it just might be that just our limited perception is making it look to us like it's particles, but really what really reality is composed of is just waves. So that's quantum field theory. It's absolutely fascinating, and there are only a couple of physicists out there that actually talk about it in a way that people like you and I can understand. So Dr. Sean Carroll is one of them. All right, so as always, I'm curious to know what you think. Subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, share this with your friends and family. Let's hear what they have to say too. I am interested. So, what do you think? Does observation actually affect reality, or is it just that we don't see the entire scope of reality? That's what I think, but I could be wrong, and I'm open to opinions. So, let us know. Thank you for watching, and as always, take care and God bless.